Dishonored, The Corroded Man, by Adam Christopher. Read to you today by Colby Acott. Somewhere in the city of Dunwall, 7th day, month of rain, 1851. Young Lady Emily is undisciplined, I'm afraid. Here within Dunwall Tower she receives instruction from the finest toolers known in the Isles, yet her mother spoils her, and she spends most of her time lost in imagination, wasting her time drawing or asking Corvo to teach her to fight with wooden sticks. The girl might rule the Empire some day. Every moment spent at play is another moment wasted. Field Survey Notes, The Royal Spymaster. Excerpt from the personal memoirs of Hiram Burroughs, dated several years earlier. As she pushed off the rooftop ledge behind her, three thoughts ran through her mind. One, that the ledge opposite was much further away than she had estimated, and that there was a more than fair chance she was going to fall short and tumble to what was most likely a painful and unpleasant death, dashed against the cobbles of the street 4 stories below. Two, that the month of rain was not only the most depressing time of the year. "Give me the month of high cold any time," she mused. But the waterlogged, rain-soaked nights were probably the worst to be outrunning the rooftops of the city. 3. That her impending and quite clearly unavoidable death wasn't the most regal end for the Empress of the Isles, and that her father was going to be very, very disappointed. A fourth thought, of Corvo standing over her broken body, not sad but annoyed that she hadn't managed what should have been a simple jump, was quickly knocked out of Emily Caldwell's mind as she hit the flat roof of the building feet first. Her body lithe and athletic, driven by reflexes honed and trained over the last decade, absorbed the impact of this misjudged jump by falling forward into a roll, the tails of her black coat catching in puddles and flicking a spray of water up into the air. Finishing the roll, Emily paused, kneeling on the rooftop, balanced on her hands, the rain pouring off of the peak of her hood down into the puddle underneath her. 1 breath. 2 breaths. 3. Well, that wasn't so bad, she thought. Better to overshoot than miss entirely, and not just in the dark, but in the rain. Emily allowed herself a small smile under the hood. Not bad, Empress. Not bad at all. Perhaps her father wouldn't be so disappointed with how she was doing, if only he could see her now. She pivoted on her heel, then stood and walked back to the edge. The smile vanished from her sharp, angular features, replaced with a frown, as she told herself to bloody well pay attention. Otherwise, the next mistake really would be a fatal one. Yes, it was a long way down, and that was a stupid, stupid thing to try. She'd made it, just barely, thanks to her father's training and her own endless hours of practice, leaping around the castellated ramparts of Dunwall Tower, keeping herself well out of sight of the watchman on patrol. Lightning flashed ahead, casting the silhouette of that tower into sharp relief. A moment later, the thunder rolled, as loud as cannon fire, as it echoed around the stone of the city. It was late. Actually, early. The hours were very small indeed. And with the constant downpour, Emily suspected she was the only person who was out and about. Certainly, she was the only person in the entire city commanding a view like this. Turning from the edge, she jogged up to where the building joined the next. The neighbor higher, its roof a jumbled collection of tiled surfaces, assembled with all the precision of a child who'd had too much Circonan honey cake. As she approached, Emily accelerated, then jumped, to plant 1 foot on a window sill, propelling herself up, bouncing against the angle of the wall opposite to go higher, reaching the next portion of roof and pulling herself up with her arms. She continued using the planes and angles of the building, its windows, overhangs, ledges, gables, to push up and up, until after a few minutes she was standing on top of a small square tower, the highest point, apparently, in this part of the city. She stood tall, despite the deep hood of her tailcoat. Her raven-black hair was still soaked. She sighed and pushed the hood back. Rain washed over her face as she looked out over the 1,000 labyrinthine streets and alleys crammed with tall, narrow buildings built of dark crystal granite or weathered brown brick, their gabled roofs reaching like jagged fingers towards the night sky. This was Dunwall, and it was her city, though that still didn't sit easy with her. Then the lightning flashed again, and she ducked down, wary of being seen. Her covert journey from Dunwall Tower across the rooftops to skirt the Boyle Mansion, then across the bridge named after her family, and finally over the narrow buildings that crowded the southern shoreline of the Wrenhaven River, was an exercise in secrecy and the state of mind that such stealth required. She hadn't been seen, the darkness had helped, and the rain too, and she had been trained well. 10 years of hard work, of toil in the small hours when she wasn't bound by her imperial duties. 10 years of pain, of cuts and bruises, and, well, quite a lot of blood, actually. For 10 years she had been trained by the best, in fact, trained by the Royal Protector himself, Corvo Attano. Royal Protector, and her father. Even though the years were creeping up on him, he was still the best spy, the best agent, and the best hand-to-hand combatant in the Empire. The rain pounded the rooftop, and Emily hunkered down, allowing herself a moment to think about her father. She was grateful for his presence in her life, not just for his protection, the protection he offered her as Empress, offered her as daughter. Not for his friendship and love and guidance, official and otherwise, but for his skills in the subtle arts of subterfuge, espionage, surveillance, and, of course, stealth and combat. Skills he had been instilling in her these past 10 years. More, even. Emily smiled again. It was coming up to 15 years since her coronation. Had it really been that long? 15 years since Hiram Burroughs, self-appointed Lord Regent, was thrown from power. 15 years since Emily was restored to the throne, left vacant by the murder of her mother, Empress Jessamine Caldwin I. Her mother murdered on the orders of the Lord Regent himself, part of a conspiracy that had run deep in Dunwall aristocracy, a secret circle that had finally been broken by Corvo himself. It felt like longer to Emily, a lifetime, really, and that's exactly what it had been. She had been 10 when her mother died. Now she was 25, and she could still feel the pain of her mother's absence, if she allowed herself. Most of the time she allowed those memories of Empress Jessamine to sleep in her mind. She had to, because despite the tragedy she had to live her life and do her job. And what a job it was! 15 years now she had ruled the Empire with a firm and just hand, working hard to reverse the damage done by the Lord Regent to Dunwall and the rest of her domain. At the time she and Corvo had embarked on another, less public project, the result of which allowed Emily to be here now, crouched on a rooftop in the dead of night, with no palace walls to keep her prisoner, no protocol, no etiquette to bind her actions, her thoughts out here in the open air. The city was hers. Here, now, alone, she felt she could go anywhere, do anything, and nobody would know a thing about it. Not even Corvo Attano, the Royal Protector. Because as far as she knew, as far as everyone at the palace knew, from the guards on the gate to the members of her inner court deep inside the ancient keep, the Empress was enjoying a blissful slumber in her private apartments. Emily laughed, and though the rain lessened slightly, she pulled her hood over her head again. Getting out of the tower had been the easiest part. In her bedchamber there was a hidden door which led to a secret room, one she had discovered when she was still a child, before the death of her mother and before everything changed. She had kept the knowledge to herself, although she knew some older members of the court were aware of the tower's secret rooms and hidden passageways. In the large room, beyond her bedchamber, Emily had built up an armory all of her own. Not just weapons and protective clothing, hooded cloaks and caps and coats, but gold, too, anything that might be useful to her on her new adventures. Her new adventures outside the palace walls. Although, truth be told, she hadn't needed much of it. Ropes, grapples, crampons, they just slowed her down. She had taken to using a pair of fingerless gloves, the palm and the tops of her fingers padded, giving her an excellent grip. While sparing her hands from the battering they would have otherwise taken as she traveled across the rooftops, leaping from ledge to sill. As Empress, it was her hands, perhaps surprisingly, that she felt the most self-conscious of, but for good reason, because as an Empress they were forever being kissed, or held reverently, or otherwise brought to close examination by friends and strangers alike. It was a strange life, and it wasn't one to which she was quite accustomed even after all this time. Emily glanced up, but this seemed to only encourage the skies to open up more. Renewed, the rain poured down as heavily as a wool blanket. Yet even above the roar, she heard the clock tower of Dunwall, over by the estate district, chime the second hour of the morning. Emily turned to face the sound. The clock tower was the tallest structure in the city, save for Dunwall Tower itself. For 2 months Emily had been exploring the city at night, crossing to the southern bank of Wrenhaven River, and mostly keeping to this part of the city. Perhaps that decision had been subconscious, an effort to avoid being spotted by members of the aristocracy who mostly occupied the more fashionable quarters north of the river. But the clock tower, now the view from there would be spectacular, even in the rain. It would make a good climb, too. Another test to pass. Decision made, Emily paused, willing the downpour to ease, if even a little. To her surprise, the elements appeared to obey her royal wish, the torrential downpour lightening again to a shower. Nevertheless, the rooftops would be treacherous, and she would need to take care. But there was time to get to the clock tower and then back into the palace before anyone knew she was gone. In her mind, she ran through the official schedule for the following day. No, for today. But there was nothing much on. She could afford to be tardy. Steeling herself, Emily stepped up the steep incline, her mind already plotting a route across the jumble of buildings and streets ahead. And then, with a smile, she drew her hood down and ran for the edge of the rooftop.